So yeah, let's see. We'll get started here. So I'll just tell you a bit about myself. As Peace mentioned, I'm the senior grant and RFP writer at Collaborative Partners Initiative. So I primarily do grant writing these days, but how I got here, I worked primarily in higher education prior to this. I worked in an admissions office and also did some program coordination at a university. And from there, I went on to do my own consulting business. I did application coaching for folks who were applying primarily for master's and PhD graduate programs, as well as working with some undergraduate and college transfer students as well. So I'm really proficient in working on applications of all varieties, from admissions and personal statements to grant applications and others. So that's the where my expertise for this presentation today comes from. And I'll just tell you a bit about the place where I work. We're Collaborative Partners Initiative. We are women-led and founded by veterans business. We've served about 50 clients and 200 organizations, and together our team has gotten over $70 million in funding for folks. So my little piece of the pie is actually quite small. So that's our company, and we're located in Pierce County and Tacoma, Washington. And this is a photo of our team here. So I'm happy to be here and happy to share a little bit about my team with you as well. So I'll jump into the presentation. I also want you to feel free to ask questions anytime. You can raise your hand or put something in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. Maybe Peace can help me with that as well. But please feel free to, raise your hand. I can make space for questions at the end, but also I want you to feel free to ask questions as we're going through the material today as well. So please just let me know if there's anything I can clarify. All right. So I know that many of you may be applying for residencies or other things that require the personal statement, the personal essay. So these tips will help you for that. These tips could also help if you're working on an interview or really anything else where you need to share your story and communicate about yourself. So, I want to just share a little bit about some characteristics of strong writing, like what strong essays have in common. So, the number one piece of advice that I like to share with folks is the simple little phrase at the top of the slide here, which is show, don't tell. So, let me explain what I mean by this. So, I see this a lot with folks writing where people will write out what they are some characteristics. So, for example, they might say, I am passionate about working with underserved communities. So that's good, but that is telling me something. And in your essay, what you want to try to do instead is to show that same thing. So instead of just writing the sentence to tell someone that you're really good at something or really passionate about something, it's actually a lot more impactful to demonstrate that. So you might instead explain a opportunity you had. Maybe there's of some volunteer work that you've been doing. Maybe you've been volunteering with an organization that serves underserved populations, and you've been doing this work for several years. So if you told that story instead, that would actually be a lot more impactful way of getting across the point rather than just saying, I really like working with underserved populations. It's better to illustrate that with a story rather than just saying it. This can also help with the length of your essay. One of the challenges with the personal statement is that it's fairly short. You should aim for about a 1 page length. And once you get started writing, you'll learn that that's really not very much space. And so you want to be able to use the space that you do have to be as impactful as possible. So instead of saying, I am really good at this, you want to show how you're really good at that. So use examples to illustrate your writing, and that's going to make your essay, it's going to elevate it and make it much stronger, just that one thing. You also want to focus on your strengths. So, what do you bring to the table and what can you contribute? What would you contribute to the residency program that you might be applying for? What are the strengths that you bring? You also can feel free to just use plain language. I see this also with a lot of folks that I work with. When you're working on something that feels really important, like a personal statement or an application essay, there can definitely be a tendency to feel like you need to use fancy language or maybe use a dictionary or look up fancier or bigger words to use. But I would encourage you not to do that and instead just to use really just plain language. You don't need to do anything fancy, and you definitely don't want to be overly wordy because that would make your application too long. And I like to use the analogy of thinking about this as storytelling. So perhaps you remember, perhaps in childhood or when you were young, there was a book that you read or a story that your elders told you, or maybe even a children's movie that you liked or a TV show. And think about the fact that, you can probably still remember what you loved about that story. You can probably still remember the characters and maybe where it was set. But when stories are told or shown to children, there's no big words being used or any sort of fancy language. It's simply plain language that is descriptive. And so that can sometimes, I found that that can help folks with their writing as well, just to think about how stories are told to children and remembering that you can be really clear and explicit even without doing anything really fancy or having fancy sentences. So that's really the same concept for here is just use plain language and be straightforward and really lean into those examples, going back to that first point I made again of showing rather than telling what your strengths are. Does anybody have any questions about this before I go on to the next slide? Okay, I'll move on to the next slide then. Okay, so what are you going to include in your personal statement essay? I know that something that folks often struggle with is just how to start. And I know that many of you that are going into the medical field might have been passionate about this since childhood, since you were really young. And something that I see commonly when I'm working with folks who are applying for different programs, there's a tendency to start your essay by talking about how your interest in your field started in childhood. Maybe you saw a stethoscope at the doctor's office and got really fascinated by what this was, or maybe a grandparent had health issues and you were there with them and it sparked your interest. So while that is important to you in your heart, that is a really common thread that a lot of folks share in common. And so it's not really the strongest way that you can start your essay. Because, especially for this group of folks, since you all are international medical graduates and you likely already have some professional experience and the experience that you gained in medical school, you have so much experience that you're bringing to the table. And so you don't need to go all the way back to childhood to explain why you're interested in medicine. So instead, what you want to do is highlight your accomplishments. What research have you been involved in? What did you do during your medical education? What has your professional experience been like? those are the things that you can share about in your essay that will be a lot more impactful. Because one thing you want to think about is you want your essay to stand out. You want to create an essay that is uniquely you and that no one else could submit. You want it to be completely unique and from your perspective. And so what is going to be unique about you is your specific accomplishments, your research, your experience, what you did in medical school. Those are the things that are going to be unique to your story. So don't feel like you need to go all the way back to the beginning and share what first sparked your interest in medicine. It's better to focus on what you want to do, be forward focused. So maybe what are your career goals? What's your dream job? What specialty do you want to work in? Those are the kinds of things that are going to be better for you to focus and highlight in your essay. Any questions so far before the next slide? Okay. So, as I mentioned, you really want your essay to stand out, right? You want the reviewers to remember your essay. They want you want to stand out, right? So, I know that particularly for this group of international medical graduates, you are applying for a lot of different programs. And I know that it can seem possibly really exhausting to personalize each essay for every school. But what I would suggest is that the probably the final paragraph of your essay or the second to last paragraph should be unique for each school. So you're going to primarily use the essay for each program that you're applying for, but you're going to have one paragraph that you personalize for each residency or each program that you're applying for. And the reason that you want to do this is because it's really a two-way street. When the reviewers are reading your essay and reviewing your application, they want to see how you will fit into the residency or to the program. But it's also a two-way street because you want to also make sure that you're a good fit for that residency and that program. And so I highly recommend doing just a bit of research. And of course, you can make this fast because I totally understand that you're applying for a lot of different residencies and this could be time consuming. But even if you spent just 10 minutes researching each residency program and personalized a couple of sentences for that residency, I think that could make a big difference. I know that this is definitely the case with admissions and folks that I've talked to working in other forms of admissions is that they really look for, did this applicant take the time to learn what this program would be like and share why they would be a good fit? So, for example, there might be a particular field of specialty that the hospital or the clinic offers. There might be a particular clinician that you want to work with, or maybe the hospital or clinic is located in an area that has a certain population that you want to work with. So those could all kinds of be ideas for how you could personalize each application. But I do think that this will help your application stand out and set you apart from the crowd because it'll show that you've done your research and that even though you may just be applying for all the programs you can because you just need to get in somewhere to move your career forward, I totally understand that. But, at least taking a few minutes to find something that would be good that you would like about that particular residency or program, I think could go a long way for bolstering your chances for getting admitted to those programs. Any questions so far? Yeah, Hannah, what question can I answer for you?
Yeah, I have a quick question about this part. Should I put the personalized part in the last paragraph or in the middle of the essay?
I think that it depends on how you've structured your essay, I think I often see it at the end, having a final paragraph about why you're applying for this program specifically. But
Mhm.
again, it would depend on how your essay is structured. So I think there's no hard and fast rule for where it goes, just as long as it's in there somewhere, I think is the more important part.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Ariana.
You're welcome, Hannah. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so we'll talk about some common pitfalls that you might want to avoid. So, I think the biggest thing that I would advise you is just to avoid kind of what I would call filler, which would be generic writing that could be written by any applicant. So when you're reading over your essay, take a look and think, could someone else have written this sentence? Is this just generic that could be written by anyone? Because you really want to avoid that. Because, like we said, your essay is only about a page long, so that's not much space, and you really want to make yourself stand out. So if you've written kind of filler or generic things that could be written by any candidate, those are not going to make your essay stand out. And so that kind of goes with the first point I have on here, which would be that I would caution you not to rely on AI to write your essay. I know AI tools are really proliferating right now and they can be super helpful and they have a lot of really good uses. But one thing that AI does a lot is just creating kind of generic content that could be used by anybody. And so that's a caution against using AI to write your essay is just it's probably going to end up being too generic. Another thing that AI will do a lot is repeat and rehash things. So, it's kind of one way to tell if something has been written by AI is if there is a lot of times a conclusion paragraph that kind of summarizes everything that's been in the essay. AI loves to do that, and it's really not necessary, especially in this format where you have such a short amount of space. You have only one page and you have a lot of ground to cover because you have a lot of experience and accolades that you want to share. So don't feel like you have to put a conclusion paragraph on the end that just restates everything that you've already said because that's something that AI might do. And again, it just isn't always necessary. So, don't feel like you have to have some sort of grand way to wrap things up. You can have, whatever your last paragraph is, that can just be your last paragraph. And maybe you have one sentence at the end that might be, kind of in conclusion. But and avoid, you don't need to take up space by kind of summarizing everything again within your conclusion. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, let's see. All right, so next we have how to refine your essay. So, one suggestion I have, I know a lot of people when they're just starting to write the personal statement, if you're at that original stage where you don't have anything on paper yet, it can be really hard just to get started. And I see a lot of people struggle with writer's block of just not knowing how to get started. So, one thing that I suggest is just to let go of the need to structure things to begin with. And just first thing, the way to start is just get all of your ideas out on paper. Everything that you want to write, every example that you want to share, every experience you want to talk about, just go ahead and get all of that down onto paper. And then you can group things. You can think about, what things go together. Like maybe you've told a couple of examples from your time in medical school, or maybe you've shared a couple of examples about why you're interested in this field. So once you get everything on paper, then you can start to organize things. And I find that that's a much easier way to start. And something that I actually see a lot when I'm working with students and I'm doing admissions coaching as they're applying for different programs. A lot of times, something that I'll see is the draft of an essay that they'll give me. I'll end up suggesting that they use, it's often one of the last sentences. I'll often suggest that that ends up being their first sentence. So I see this a lot. It's like you can get it all out on paper and then you have things to work with and you can work with the organization. So I've seen this really help people a lot just to get you past your writer's block and help you get unstuck. Another tip that I have is to ask somebody to look over your essay that isn't necessarily an expert in the field. So you don't need to find another physician or someone else in the medical field. And also try not to ask someone that's really close to you. So maybe don't ask a close family member. Maybe if you have a coworker or someone that knows you but not knows you super well, it can be helpful to ask them to just read over your essay because something that I see a lot is that there are sort of gaps in logic, because when it's your story that you're telling, then it's much easier to go ahead and sorry, I just looked away for a second and then I lost my place. But yeah, so if somebody doesn't know you, if they don't know you well, it's easier for them to see if you've maybe had a gap in the way that you're explaining things, and somebody might be able to point that out for you to see if something doesn't make sense. And I just noticed that there's a few questions in the chat. So sorry, that's what I was just noticing. Yeah, so Hannah has asked if we can use AI to proofread expression, like to help choose the better vocabulary or phrase. Yes, definitely. So I think that's a good use of AI, Hannah. Thank you for asking that question. So exactly. So just don't, the caution is to avoid having AI write the whole essay for you, but as long as you're getting your ideas out on paper first, then you can certainly have AI help you refine that. Okay, I also see another question here about is there a common structure for the winning essay and which part needs more refinement and you think is the best one? So I think that the, the things that you definitely want to include are what what specific field that you're interested in, the specific of what you want to do, like what is the field that you want to go into. And then, so I think usually, and again, I work on all types of essays, not really specific for medical applications. So I'll give this advice just as general, but the general structure that I see with folks that I'm working with is you want to start off by saying what you want to do. In this case, what is your career look like? What is your career trajectory? What job do you want to have? What specialty, what field do you want to work in? So that's kind of your first, your intro. And then probably your two biggest paragraphs after that are going to go over what is your experience? What professional experience do you have? What work experience? What maybe volunteer experience? What research experience? What did you do in medical school? Just going over all of your experience would be probably your two biggest body paragraphs. And then maybe your last paragraph might be about personalized for this particular residency program, like we talked about. So why are you applying for this residency program? So I think those are the biggest things to include. Is that helpful? Feel free to ask a follow-up question if you'd like. Okay. So I see one more question in the chat here. Okay, yes, it is helpful. Awesome. You're very welcome. Okay, so Ted has asked the issue of being unique, maybe too unique versus too generic. No worries, we haven't addressed this yet. So I don't think you can be too unique. Yeah, I think that it's it's great to be as unique as possible. You know, it's your unique story, even though there are other people that are going into the particular field that you're pursuing, that particular type of medicine. It's still your story is unique to you, how you got there, the experience that led you there, what you want to do ultimately as your career. So no, I don't think you can be too unique because this is the personal statement, right? It's personal. It should not be able to be written by anybody other than you. Everything about it should be unique to you. And does that answer your question, Ted? Okay, great. Okay, let's see. I see another question here in the chat. Is it best to talk about your latest experience? Yeah, this is a great question. You know, again, you all are a unique group since you may already have been practicing medicine for a number of years. So I think that if it is the case that you have a lot of experience, many years of experience, again, you only have one page, so you'll have to be a bit choosy about what you share. So I think what's best to talk about is your most important and your most relevant experience. So, if you are applying for a residency program that's in one particular field or one particular specialty, and the experience you had that's related to that is a few years ago, you do want to talk about that experience. I think that there's a balance because it might also be relevant to talk about what you've been doing more recently, but I think it doesn't really matter the timeline. It matters more what's most relevant, what is going to strengthen your application the most by pulling together all the pieces and showing that you have the experience that is needed to move forward with this new path and with this residency program. Is that helpful? Any follow-up questions about that I can answer? Okay. Well, those were all great questions. I'm just double checking the chat here to make sure I haven't missed anything. Oh, thank you, Peace, for dropping our social media in the chat there. Okay. Well, any other questions? I do have more time if anybody else has anything else they want to ask. I think this is my last slide. Let me just double check here. Yeah, that is the last slide. I do have, yeah, we've got some of our ways to find us here on this last slide as well. And I see one more question has come in. Okay, approach on addressing the question about gap years, especially on interruptions from the clinical care during the transition period here, where we probably worked in other non-clinical roles. Yeah, so I think that it is appropriate to address gap years to some extent, but that you don't need to spend a lot of time on that because again, if you did non-clinical work during those gap years, you don't really need to talk about that non-clinical work in your personal statement because you want to keep your statement relevant for the medical experience that you do have. But I do think it's appropriate to address gap years just to say, I moved from one country to another country. During this time, I spent several years in non-clinical roles. And, if there is anything that you did during that time that is related to your medical experience, maybe you did some volunteering or worked at a first aid center or something like that, you might be able to share about that. So I do think the primary thing is that you want to focus on your medical experience and maybe just spend a sentence or two just acknowledging that you did have a gap or an interruption in your journey. But again, you just always want to focus on your strengths. So when you're writing this, you want to think about like the framing of you're framing this as the strengths and the things that you're good at and that you've learned. So I get questions like this a lot from students, folks who are applying for graduate school or college. They might also have had gaps, or maybe they had a year where they, were failing or didn't get good grades or something like that. So one thing to think about is how you can frame maybe challenges as things that you learned. So if you had some gap years, while you were moving or doing other things, you might, if there's something you can pull out from that, like think about what was something that you gained from that experience, because the challenges that you've overcome, such as maybe gaps or interruptions in your education or in your career journey, those can really be powerful learning experiences. So maybe during that time, you became really resilient, or you learned something, you developed soft skills that made you more able to have care for patients and be relate to patients on a personal level. So think about that too as you're thinking about how to describe maybe gaps or interruptions. Think about how you can frame those from a strengths framework. Like what came out of that was really helpful for your career. So there's always kind of a way to tie things back into your career journey and how this experience has all moved you forward. Is that helpful? Okay, great. Um, awesome. And yes, I can definitely share these slides. I've shared these with Peace, so I'll let Peace share these with you if she's able to. Awesome. Thank you, Peace. Okay, Hannah has asked, what kind of context do you think is an attractive start in an essay? Yeah, the first sentence, it's always so hard, right? It's people feel like they have to write something really poetic or fancy or catchy. I think that if something comes naturally, you might be able to start with something catchy, but often what I advise people to start with is just a really simple statement of what you are interested in and what you want to do. So you could say, I am interested in pursuing a career in physical therapy, and I have 10 years of experience related to this. So you could actually just be really simple. And I often think that that is the best. So essentially just think of, if you were kind of writing a line at the top of your resume, like what are you seeking? Like what is your dream job? What are your career goals, and what is your area of specialty, and what is your experience? What is your expertise? So I think the best way to think of that first line is just a really simple high level summary of you, and that you're going to explain all of that more in the following paragraph. So, this is what I'm interested in, this is the specialty I want to do, this is my dream job. That's kind of your intro, and then your other paragraphs back that up. They explain. So yeah, don't put pressure on yourself to feel like you need to do something poetic or catchy or fancy at the beginning. While you could do that if that's something that comes to you easily and is, yeah, just something that comes to you easily, but don't put too much pressure on yourself, because it's often, like I said, just using plain language and being able to articulate yourself clearly really goes a long way. So it can be a simple start is an attractive start, I think. What other questions?